Hey, beautifuls. I am so happy to welcome you to another episode. I have the dear Lisa with me today. Lisa, welcome. I am so glad we made it, and I'm really excited for today's episode about spirituality and relationships. That's what we decided on. And yeah, before we dive deep into that, I would love for you to share a bit about yourself and your journey before we get into that.
Thank you, Anna. It's so good to be here. I know we've been planning this for quite a while. I thought that I was going to speak to you when I was on a ski trip, and that did not happen. Yeah, and now we're here. But I'm so excited to be here and just connecting with you finally. But my name is Lisa Mae Francisco, and I am a women's empowerment coach, and I love just guiding women to heal the relationship wounds and embody self-love to attract healthy, loving relationships through different types of practices. And, my journey, it's funny because people see me on, online or my website, and they don't necessarily see that in between of what happened prior to me being in this stage. And so I always think it's so important to call it out because we don't really know what's happening or what's behind the scenes. And for a while, I think, my spiritual journey really began when I got sober in 2011. I was living in New York at the time, and I, you know, just wasn't really connected to myself, to my heart, to who I essentially was. And it wasn't until that I got sober that I started to understand who I was. It was an opportunity for me to dive deeper into what are emotions, since I always ran away from my emotions. And so that kind of just was that initiation that opened the floodgates to everything. It allowed me to look at my relationship to other people. How do I bring myself in working environments? How does my upbringing affect the way that I am in relationships romantically? And so that really just led me on the path of exploring, why do I do what I do? And so I like to call it the awareness phase. And from there, I dabbled into many different types of tools, worked with many different therapists, and that really allowed me to think about, how do I want to live my life differently? Once I kind of looked at the patterns of how I was running my life, I was dating really emotionally unavailable people at the time. I was afraid of being seen. I was really, really afraid of being seen. And so it was almost allowing society to influence me on the path that I should be on. Growing up in America, but having immigrant parents, it was very much that path of, okay, you'll get an amazing job in corporate and all those things and make lots of money. But I knew just something was disconnected from my heart, from my soul. And by allowing myself to dabble into different spiritual practices, meditation, EFT tapping, yoga, all these different things, it just allowed me to have this avenue of, what is it that I really want to do? What is it here that or what was I born to do, essentially? And I was, a closeted spiritual person. So it was like, some of the people knew me as someone who was super spiritual, but then other people at work or just even acquaintances knew me as just, someone who's on the corporate track and seemed, I don't want to say that spirituality isn't normal, but, just on the surface. And I, got to a point where I realized that I just really wanted to connect more deeply and do the thing that I love to do, which is coaching other people. Because I was doing it on the side, but I wasn't really talking about it or advertising it. And, it slowly evolved from there of wanting to specifically work with women and specifically work in relationships and self-love, because that's been a lesson that I feel like I've been given, or that I've chosen for myself to learn in this lifetime, and having many teachers in that field. And I just feel this call and mission to help other women choose healthy partners, because I see the effects of what it does to other children in the household. And so my desire is to help create and sustain these healthy family blueprints in the world, so the world can be, better.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I got shivers
Yeah.
when you say that. And I think it's such an important awareness to come to, that the way we treat ourselves, or the extent the amount that we allow love for ourselves to flow from ourselves is affecting the relationships. And of course, like if you do have kids, the kids or any other like interaction you have with a human, because I feel sometimes when we're not reflecting that deep, it's like, okay, well, I'm maybe not cool with my body or with a certain characteristic, but we don't necessarily make that leap to see like, okay, oh, that is affecting everything in my life. And therefore, a lot of stuckness comes from that place.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of like, of this feeling of like, maybe hopelessness when it comes to changing habits or changing career path or finding someone to be in a relationship with that treats you well. And there's this connection is often not made, at least like in the like work I do, from the women to like see like, oh, it's how I treat myself, about how I love myself, and that is reflected back. So there's quite a bit of resistance to letting that in, and I think it's deeply necessary on the point in evolution collectively that we are right now, that we as women embrace loving ourselves first and ditching this like I feel worldwide paradigm of we need to take care for everyone else before we care for ourselves, before we're allowed to prioritize ourselves. And that's what I see in the work you do, is like this, like, showing up for yourself in a way that is unapologetically and soft and powerful at the same time. But it's you said closeted, is maybe not closeted anymore. That's a big step. We've talked about that before a bit. So, wow.
Yeah. And I think, especially as women, we're taught at a very young age to just be the host, be the caretaker. And then that leads into sometimes a lot of people pleasing tendencies, wanting to be the good girl, wanting to be just prim and proper. And it's this identity that's being given to you. And all of a sudden, I see it happen a lot. And then all of a sudden women just have this awakening, this come to of what I'm doing has been for everyone else but me. And then there's this reclamation of this journey of who am I? What do I love? Your friends start to change. People start to question the things you do, the things that you like. And there comes this grieving point of maybe you're in this liminal space of, I don't know who I am, but trusting that process, because it's which is so hard, because it's easier to abandon yourself than other people, especially when you have codependent people pleasing tendencies. And what we're off, like, women are very relational, right? And so can you withstand learning to be on your own? Can you withstand to trust yourself? Can you withstand to have that connection to source, to spirit, whatever your, spiritual beliefs are? And that's when the testament and truth of, are you willing to walk the fire and be initiated into the evolution of your soul?
I feel what you touched on before, this like, who am I really? It's
Mhm.
an unimaginable big topic that most people aren't even aware of, because and that might sound like, strange, but I feel it's really what you said, this people pleasing tendencies, the good girl syndrome that so many of us have been programmed with through our parents or society. It doesn't actually matter, but there is this like, you need to be a certain way to be loved, to be accepted, to be liked, to be successful, or a good mother, whatever, wife. So there's a lot of like masks that we're able to wear. But who is really beneath that? So I feel like the point when we realize as women, like, I don't actually know who I am, that's a big one, because that should be the baseline for all of your decisions. But if you don't know, like, who are you? You touched on that before when you said that you decided to become sober. And that was a big, lifting of a veil of, who am I really? Who do I want to be, or who do I want to become? And I feel, especially with all sort of things that could numb us, and there are like many, and almost everyone I know has one or two or three of these addictions. There is so much like coming on top of what we actually are, that it's kind of hard to discover. what is actually me. And then you need the courage to follow that nudge if you discovered it. And maybe that's the like closeted thing that we've talked about even before we hit record, is this like, okay, maybe I have an idea of what it is, but then do I play that out? Do I like actually act upon that? Or do I have this mask that I wear in public or work environment? And then there's like the thing that I do at home that I don't talk about. And how do you like, what was your first step to kind of merge these two and come out of that spiritual closet, maybe, in front of your loved ones, in front of your family, in front of your work? Because I feel it's like a step-by-step process. It's not like a coming out and saying like, okay, that's me. I'm kind of doing all these things that you call strange, but it's more like a gradual process for most people.
Yeah, and it certainly is, right? It's like you have a new level of exploration of just discovering who you are. And I think it's perfectly fine to be discreet about it until you can make sense of it yourself. And other people may think differently. Other people will be like, oh, you just need to be authentic all the time. And I'm not saying like you can't be, and you certainly can. It's just what makes you feel comfortable with, how can you understand what is happening? And that's just me, and that's my personal experience with it. And I think it comes from this idea of aligning to your nervous system, right? And I just know that if your nervous system doesn't have the capacity to understand this new identity that you're taking on, there will be self-sabotage. And so you try to introduce it into little bits and pieces until you're fully ready to reclaim it, And so maybe it's like you're in a relationship and you feel this nudge to move in a different path, but you've been with that relationship for a long, it was long term. I'm hoping you don't just break up with them because you just have this idea. It's like you learn to sit with it, you learn to digest it in a way that makes sense to you, and you create room for that new part of you that's emerging. And so, for me, when I got the idea of, okay, I want to go full time into my coaching, I decided to wait a year. I decided to coach people ahead of time and just see like, hey, do I really like this? Or is this just some fantasy that I'm romanticizing and then all of a sudden I'll regret it later? Because there has to be, and that's just me merging my masculine and feminine qualities of my emotions and the pink to follow it, but then also being realistic about why I want this desire. Is it feeding something deeper that I want to disassociate from because I'm unhappy? Is the grass truly greener, or is it just going to be another shade of brown? That's the way that I have approached it whenever I feel like there's this new person that wants to come out.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. And I feel it's especially with what we've touched upon before, the women who have this empathic qualities, who have been people pleasers most of their lives. It's really often a hard thing to say like, okay, from now on, I'm 180% that other part of me, and I'm showing that fully. As you said, it's like really a thing for a nervous system to do such an opening. It feels scary. You might feel like you're gonna die, and a piece of your ego does at that point. So I think it's really taking a lot of pressure out to say, like, I'm doing that gradually and I'm giving myself the time. And you mentioned masculine and feminine energy. And what I've learned on my journey is my first mentor was a man, and he did amazing work. And the way he believed in me was a way that no one ever believed in me, and not even my parents. But like it was a level of belief that really like touched my soul very deeply. Still, it was a masculine energy, and this like, you need to do it now, you need to come out now, that masculine checklist that totally like overwhelmed me, and I was not able to do that. And when you just said like, do it slowly, I thought like, oh my God, what a wonderful way to take the pressure off for all these like highly sensitive women who maybe like need to digest it more slow, that there is that big change and what it actually means. Like you said, not to dive into something head over heels without knowing, is it really me? Is that really who I am? Is that really the path I want to follow? Or is it just something that I can run away or towards without knowing what it is. So I feel like giving ourselves the time and the ability to actually take it slow and see what comes up, the right things can emerge in a different way because you don't use force. You come back to your power, and that's a very different energy. So, like, this permission to do that is actually a big thing, especially in a world that is so fast paced and so structured.
Right, right. It's almost like, okay, if you're at that level, then you already need to be operating at this way or have this certain outcome. And I think there's something that needs to be said with the unfurling of time and surrendering to that and being open to, like, so that's the difference, right? With masculine energy, it's very much linear. And with feminine, it's cyclical. And so you might have 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. And and often times what will happen is you'll go back to the old way of being because it's very familiar. I remember this was many moons ago, but I was starting to date different people in my life. And I remember and that's when I didn't have self-esteem. I didn't have any concept of worth. And so I remember when I was dating someone who, felt good on paper or whatever, I just didn't feel worthy enough. And I remember calling one of my girlfriends, sitting out at the restaurant and just saying, like, I need to talk to you. I feel really nervous. I don't feel good enough to go on this date, blah, blah, blah. And she gave me a little pep talk, which is really beautiful. But I ended up going back to an old relationship a couple months afterwards because I just couldn't fully withstand being in that energy of being in that bridge of that woman who had worth yet. That was just too big for me. And so it's almost like having these bridge identities almost, or having these bridge moments of, okay, maybe not fully there yet, but it's a step in the right direction and doing it in a way that feels really nourishing to you.
Yeah, because you could, like, or many people do, then see these steps back, quote unquote, as a bad thing. And they like beating themselves up for saying, like, oh, I, kind of failed in that way. But you can, like you said, if you're seeing it as a circular or as a spiral movement, then it's like more like, oh, okay, here's a similar situation, but am I still the same, or have I learned something? Do I look from a different perspective on it? And it's this worthiness that you touched upon in relationships. I've experienced that too. I was smiling when you talked about it because there's so much similarities in the people we kind of meet on our way to find the perfect partner, whatever that might mean. And there's so often this like unconscious wound that we fall for being not treated the way that we actually desire to be treated. But it's kind of like we don't allow ourselves, or it's too scary to like go to that person who actually sees you. We touched on fear of being seen before. And I think that's a big thing that we need to like tell our nervous system that it's safe to be seen, that it's safe to have someone who really wants you to thrive, to be you, and not to be like the nice girl version of you or the presentable version of you. So it has a lot to do with how much we can allow ourselves to be that within ourselves, so that we can like, have that in our relationship too. And yeah, I don't know, how are your clients navigating these moments when there is that step back, when quote unquote step back, when there is this like, oh my God, I got back to my ex, or I didn't even go to that date, even though that person like seemed nice, or I didn't even open up to that person that I've met that I like really like. But then again, it was this like withdrawal because of fear or nervousness coming up.
Right. I think that's when, and this is what I like to call invoking the inner mother. That's when you really have to understand the compassion or exercise that compassion for ourselves, because we don't change through self-judgment. We change and thrive through empowerment, through nourishing words, through encouragement. And so when I work with different clients who maybe they have done something that they feel shame about, I often teach them, okay, well, how do you connect to that cosmic inner mother? And what would she say to you? What would she do? Even if you didn't have any of those models, what does it actually look like? And sometimes it's actually really difficult. People don't understand how to connect to that wounded part of them. And so it's often easier to imagine scenarios where you're granting that same type of compassion to someone else that isn't yourself. Sometimes we treat other people and give other people more grace than we do give ourselves. And that's the thing that actually shows up in relationships, like you talked about, because the level of worth or standards that we have for ourselves, we bring that everywhere. And that's where it just becomes sort of this dynamic where you really have to keep yourself in check of, what are your intentions for being in a relationship as well? Is it because you want someone to love you or make you feel better? And I'm not saying, oh, you can't just, or you have to be perfect, or you have to do all the work before you get involved with anyone, because it can be a beautiful opportunity to allow yourself to face that fear of being seen while in partnership and really face that, because sometimes it's easier to do it when you're in partnership as opposed to being on your own individual journey. But there's always lessons in all of it, really.
Which is also the beauty, isn't it? Because the amount of mirrors you get back from a person you're living with or spending a lot of time with, there is so much learning opportunity, and there is so much opportunity to get to know ourselves better. I love that you touched on this, like not needing to be perfect before we enter a relationship. Yeah, of course, the more healed we are, the more healed our relationship will be when we enter it. But that doesn't mean that we can't heal further or that we can evolve further within it. And I feel it's especially such a gift if you have someone who like mirrors that back and goes that way with you. But often there's fear of being seen, so like, oh, okay, there is something vulnerable, or maybe we're like easy to forgive our partners for things that they kind of did wrong or have a challenge with, but for ourselves we don't. And so there's a lot of like things that we can see. And I have one friend who always says like, don't break the mirror when she's about to, like, when she's really upset with her partner because he's done something that she really cannot understand. She's like, oh, I wanted to get out of that relationship. And I say like, don't break the mirror. And I think that's such a beautiful way to put it, because it gives you this extra level of perspective to say like, oh, okay, well, everything that I'm upset about with that person, it's actually active in me as well, because otherwise I wouldn't have been triggered in the first place, because I am triggered. So it's something inside of me. And that I feel is like a really big understanding or awareness to gain, that that's an opportunity. That doesn't mean you're never annoyed, but this annoyed, this anger, this whatever comes up, it can be your opportunity to like heal a wound or get an awareness about. And therefore like the relationship is especially beautiful in like the spiritual sense as well.
Sometimes it takes a longer time to get to that point.
Yes, not always there.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's like the longer that you stay in a relationship, the more you start to understand that lesson, the more you get used to the idea that, okay, it's not necessarily the person, that there's something wrong with them or I need to leave the relationship. It's something that's aggravating, something in me that I need to look at. And I'm not saying you should discount, toxic or abusive behavior because it's aggravating you, because there is, that is, right, if you do want to leave. But, for example, it's like, sometimes I'll work with clients and we other partners at giving them that much attention. And so I'll often look at, okay, so when you are apart, what can you do for yourself? If there are no signs of them just being dismissive or, it's just, they feel this fear of abandonment when they're apart. And so it's an opportunity to look at, okay, well, why do I feel that abandonment? And what can I do to soothe myself when it gets really activated in that moment?
Which is so powerful, isn't it? Because then we can stop blaming another one for not doing what we expect or what we wish for, but we can take that power back and say like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can give that to myself as well. And then often things change within the relationship don't they? I think it's really funny how it works. Like if you give yourself the attention that you might have craved from your partner but haven't gotten, and you kind of make that shift to say like, okay, then I care for myself, then I am more attentive to myself, and then all of a sudden your partner is too. So I think it's really beautiful how these things work and how much power you get out of what you just said. Like when women can have that insight, have that awareness of, I can give that to myself. I don't actually need another person to feel that. Yeah, it's beautiful that they are there, but I can generate that feeling from myself. So this creation from within and not the external world that needs to be perfect for whatever you need right now. So it's like a very different energy, isn't it?
It is. And 9 times out of 10, your partner will probably find you more attractive.
Yeah. Very funny. I wish I would have known all this when I was like 15 or 16 and like relationships seemed so hard and everything was so complicated, you know? Imagine a world that people know that from an early age on.
Well, I think it's so interesting because, you know, society's created in a way to help you just not trust yourself.
Yes.
And so when we grow up in that paradigm, it just becomes easier to rely on other people, rely on romantic relationships, rely on your looks, anything, to not place value on the intrinsic characteristics that you have. And so, you know, there will be that reclamation not only of who are you, but just your intuition, that self-trust that has been severed at a very young age. And it takes a long time to build. And I think, you know, intuition is essentially following your heart. It's essentially listening to those visceral signals from your body of knowing which way to go, where maybe there isn't necessarily logic that gives rationale for a decision that you want to take. And it's being okay with not understanding the rationale, but just knowing that you're following your heart and the expansion that you get from it. Because ultimately, what I find is if you get really, really quiet enough, and if you tune into it, and if you have a sacred time where you truly connect to your body, you will find your intuition. And the more you listen to it, the more it just becomes easier over time.
Yes, I agree. And the stillness that you mentioned is for me as well an essential part, but often it's exactly the thing that we are not taught to do. This like going in stillness, especially like today, it's even harder than before with all the like entertainment or distraction, however you want to put it. There's stillness is a thing that we rarely gift ourselves with, and yet that's when like the subtle voice of intuition can come up, because if you're constantly like looking at Netflix or your phone, then how can your intuition come up when you haven't practiced it? And so I had a lot of people who said like, no, I don't hear anything. I don't have intuitive gifts. How is that with your clients? Are there like, is there a lot of resistance around connecting with themselves or getting into stillness or getting into that space? Because I imagine the more deep we are conditioned with wearing these different masks and being someone who we are not, then it's sometimes really hard to come out of that, because our paradigm kind of keeps us in the place we are and connecting back to your intuition and sitting still, and then maybe even making decisions based on that illogical inner knowing. That's a scary thing.
It is. And that's where it comes back to learning to operate in a different way, to rewire. And it's like, if we want to connect back to our hearts, if we want to connect back to our wounds, our intuition, it requires us to do things differently that we might find, that we might scoff at, that we might not like, that we might look at with disdain. And it's learning to overcome that ego and be open to a new way of being. So, you know, spending time in quiet. Now, you know, I'll do it in different moments where I'll always start a session with meditation to, you know, because always, you know, we'll often start the sessions and there's just so much energy. But being able to ground yourself, you have clarity. because oftentimes we're coming in with our ego, with our stories. I'm right. This is my identity. This is what happened. And that's why I love Kundalini yoga, is because there are 10 different bodies. And one of the bodies is neutral, getting to the neutral mind. And so oftentimes when you do different kriyas, which is just a sequence of asanas, different body postures or hand movements, mudras, sometimes you'll go through the different emotions and the waves and the cadence of, oh my God, I hate this. So stupid. Oh my gosh, okay, I'm feeling better. I did it. I feel really good. And, it's like, it's being able to look at the polarities of the experience to get to that neutral mind. And that's where meditation takes you, is being able to access that point where, like we were talking about in the green room, where you become the observer of your life. You become the object and the observer. And when you're able to understand that those are two different identities, that's when you're able to change your actions, because you have the awareness in that in between state to know a different path.
Yes. Yes. I feel Kundalini yoga, or maybe even any type of yoga, this of movement and being in postures that are slightly uncomfortable, maybe. This duality that you touched on, I feel that's something very, very uncomfortable, but at the same time so clearing, so that sometimes there's cleansing through pain. And I see that in EFT tapping as well, this like duality of like working with a feeling that you don't like, but then acknowledging it and like feeling all the total spectrum of emotions that is in between this, like, and that's how I want to feel. There's so much healing in that space, in that in between of like, however you want to do it, if you do it through yoga or tapping or whatever, any form of prayer, actually looking at all of this. And we touched before a bit on like disconnecting from emotions or not being able to feel our emotions. And I think that's a crucial part in our society, to come back to feel what is inside and not feel that we need to be in control or that emotions are something scary, but like to embrace what we feel, because that's there. All the insights are there. All the healing is there. And still such a scary place to go with that emotion and kind of embrace it. And I often wonder why we have been taught that these emotions are kind of a bad thing. Yeah, joy is maybe like accepted all over the world, but all of the more complicated ones, I don't know any woman who hasn't heard that sentence of don't be so emotional, don't be so sensitive, and like this devaluing of emotion. If you think about the feeling that is in there, that's actually quite a suppression that has happened.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to your point of how society just prioritizes logos, logic, because emotions can be very subjective, right? But if you have data, it can be very objective. And oftentimes I find that the people who are the ones that tell you you're too sensitive or you're too emotional or too needy are the ones that haven't been able to access or sit with those emotions themselves. And so it's better to denounce that, because if they don't know how to manage it, then how can they manage yours? How can they sit there? How can they hold space? And so it's important to remember, like, don't take offense when someone is saying that to you. Especially when you're tapping into your emotions, especially when it's difficult. And, no one likes learning through pain, but it's through pain that we actually learn.
A lot, yeah.
I mean, sure you can learn through pleasure too, but I mean, for me personally, the lesson just sticks more if I have a rock bottom. If I have higher stakes, then I'm that's just me. I'm hard headed. I'm very stubborn. That's what I'm able to learn. And so there's just become this reckoning period of accepting that in life, there's also equal amounts of pleasure and pain, and just knowing that it's part of it. Just how there can be different endings in a relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship has to end, but that's just part of it. Or I remember when I would, fight in relationships, my go-to thought in my head would always be, well, I'm going to break up with this person, and I didn't understand the idea that you could repair something, that you could still have a fight and have that not mean that it was the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. I had that too for such a long time. It was like fight means end of relationship. And
Yeah.
really interesting. I have a lot of clients who I'm not in relationship coaching, but well, it comes up. Um,
Yeah.
so many women stay in relationships exactly because of that, because they think like if they show up fully or if they say something in a fight, then that means the relationship is ending. And from the outside, sometimes maybe you wish that it would end because there's so much like not being authentic in that relationship, but
Mhm.
seems so scary at the same time for these women that they stay in relationships that they know that are not good for them, where they constantly have the kind of fear of being someone who their partner doesn't like if they're authentic, but then still sticking
Mm.
to it. And that's kind of like such a pattern that is emerging that it's really hard to see that from the outside when people come to me like, how can I ever be authentic if I feel that would be the end of the relationship? That it's a
Mm.
heartbreaking start of a coming back to yourself. I feel if there's this choose me, choose a relationship moment,
Mhm.
because then often we choose a relationship.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing is, a person that values the relationship more than themselves. And it's hard to be in that place because parts of you are dismissed, right? That part of you that wants to be authentic, but is willing to sacrifice that in order to keep the relationship. And when I find myself in that place, then I know it's not the right relationship with me because if anything, I think the most important thing in the relationship is each of you as individuals being able to tend to your own spiritual journey. And if you can't do that, then how can you show up as a full, partnership as whole? And so that's the hard part. But I also understand that there are fears, right? If if women are older and we have those, messages, oh, you're getting older, if you want to have a child, blah, 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 or who's gonna love you. And there's not like all of those stories that we tell ourselves. And so there's this willingness to settle because they think ultimately that's the path to their dream.
And also maybe
Yeah.
because you touched on that before, this like, who am I really? The moment that you actually don't fully or even partially know who you are, it's much easier to
Mhm.
stay in a relationship that is not aligned for you because you cannot even fight for you because you don't know who you actually are. So you might tend to do things and then maybe at a point much later in time you feel like, oh, I actually didn't want to do that. Actually, I don't like doing that at all. But it's kind of like it just had that momentum and it was going. And I feel that that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's why I think it's not a bad thing to meet your person when you're much older because you have a better sense of self. And I remember I was young, I was like really diving into relationship work. And I remember I was in this group and they were much older people, much, much, much older. They were with partners already and they already had a life with them. And they would always tell me, I wish that I had done this work before I got into my marriage because sometimes you just end up marrying the wrong person because you're young, you're not awakened to who you truly are. And so that's just the next step that you do. And I would rather know who I am, bring that into the relationship than be with someone just to have that.
To not be
It
alone.
doesn't mean as right, exactly. It doesn't mean as much. It's not as fulfilling. But when you're able to reach the level of the depths of who you are and trust in that and have faith in that, that's that's richness that you're able to bring into the relationship as well.
That reminds me of what you said earlier with like being worthy of having a partner that actually like
Hmm.
is the way you desire should be treated. This worthiness, if you don't have that, then it's like very hard to quit a relationship because who am I without it? What happens?
Hmm.
This feeling
Hmm.
of loneliness or being lost is something that comes to my mind when you think about like stepping out of a relationship that might be not the perfect one, but you kind of feel like, oh, we'll get better at the future or whatever the mind can tell us in moments like this. But then we stay in something that we, from the heart, intuition, voice, we know it's not aligned, but there's this fear of change, or maybe there's this, but what am I gonna doing then? Who am I? Will I ever find someone else? That's something that a dear friend of mine always said to me, and she says that since she's 21, and I think like, well, you're 21, yeah, you will find someone else. But for her, that's like a real fear, and the only one. So there's so much like not being connected to our heart space, to our purpose, our soul, that I feel that's often that's often what leads us to relationships that are not aligned. And because we talk about spirituality in relationship, the moment we find that spirituality and kind of tiptoe into that could be my purpose, that's how lovable I am, that's how worthy I am, that's how capable of doing anything I want I am, then that's like the place where we can really draw power from knowledge about ourselves, and therefore like choose hopefully better relationships or better ways to take care for ourselves, and to also like let others care for ourselves differently.
And I think, what you're saying is someone who's being able to choose from a place of their fullness.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes not choosing someone from the scarcity of, I need you to fulfill this lack that I have of loneliness, and willing to stay in relationships that just aren't meaningful, that aren't exciting, and they just do it. And maybe it's like, oh, well, I've already spent much time with this person and I don't want to waste it. And, nothing is wasted time. If anything, it teaches you so much. And so I think even in the place where I'm at in my life, it's learning to have faith in the lessons that I am experiencing, even if they don't feel good. And that no time is wasted. And how can I trust in truly the divine timing in everything? What would it look like to trust that the time is always correct? I'm not late. I'm not early. Everything is unfolding as it should.
What a beautiful place to be in, isn't it? Oh, it's such a good...
Catch me on another day.
I know what you mean. There is a quote that comes to my mind very often, and right now it is too, which is by Genevieve Behrens, and she said, hurry is fear, and fear is consequently destructive. And I think that for me, that was a really beautiful one, because I'm someone who tries to be everywhere at the same time and have a lot of energy, so I can most of the time. But I've never looked at this hurry in that way. And for me, that goes for worry as the same. So all of this worrying, which you touched upon right now, that's why it comes up, this like worrying or creating from a place of scarcity of like, maybe if I'm alone or I'm better off with that person, this like worrying or stressing out about things and not trusting the divine timing, that is actually destructive for ourselves. We could talk physically, but we can definitely talk from our self-worth and from the way we trust ourselves, the way we believe in ourselves. So all these little things that are maybe not very powerful on their own, but like these little stressors, they are definitely like nagging on the way we treat ourselves and the way we see ourselves. And so this like coming back to, like you said, trusting divine timing is such a big one, even though it's so intangible. But I feel it's like giving us this like, I don't have to worry. I actually can lean back. Everything will unfold. I will meet the right partner. I will have the insight that I need. I will get the promotion or whatever it is. But there's no rush because everything is divinely orchestrated. So all I have to do is be open and being like willing to learn my lesson.
And I think as human beings, we also love drama. If we're just happy all the time, if we're just in the present, it's wild, right? I create my own problems. Other people create their own problems. It's just something to do and fixate on. But when you actually look at what is around you, everything is just fabricated. All of the challenges and, it's like things not turning out the way that I hoped it would be, or in this movie in my mind. And what would it look like to just actually, on the other side of the coin of accepting timing is just accepting what is. Because everything is perfect in the present moment. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be happening. And, it's kind of boring to do that, right?
We're finished with the lesson, so what's there to do?
Right? It's like, and that's why it cracks you open to a new way of being, a new evolution, a new uncovering, a new unlayering. And it's just only now at this point in my life am I able to see, because you have more reference points of when you're, on your knees on the floor, that brought in something new. That type of energy of destruction and chaos always brings in something new. And so can you find those diamonds in that like in between space, like that we talked about? And so I always find a little bit of comfort in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing to being able to call you back to that, like the moment that is painful, because we talked about pain as a cleansing mechanism, and I really believe that. But sometimes in the moment of pain, it's kind of hard to remember that is actually a good thing, that everything is actually a good thing, because it comes from, however you want to call it, universe, God, creator, doesn't matter. But if it's there is a meaning to it, and it's for your benefit. The question is only like, are we perceiving it like that or not? But I don't know how about you, but if I look back on everything in my life, and especially the hardest moments, now in hindsight, I can totally say like all of these were necessary. All of these were good. I don't know why I worried so much, but everything played out the best possible way. And I'm only in the space I am now because of all of this, and also because of all of the hardship and all of the drama. But for the future, that is often so hard to, copy paste that for the future and say like, okay, well, if I don't know, don't get that deal, or if I lose my home, well, then that's for the best. And it's much harder to like kind of transfer that. Still, I believe it's 100% true that everything is divinely timed, and there is no need for us to hurry, worry, be in that tension all the time.
Absolutely. And it just reminds me, I was working with a teacher and we were talking about alchemy. And she said the elements of alchemy are torture, suffering, and death. That equals alchemy. Without those things, you can't have alchemy. And you talked about the pain being a cleansing process, that the pain is part of it. But you're absolutely right. It's very challenging to have that mindset, to be very positive, to find that lesson in the meantime, just because maybe the lesson just hasn't revealed itself. It's only when we're able to reflect backwards that we can understand, and we have a bigger picture holistically of how it has led to the present moment.
Yeah. And that is, I think, where spirituality for our individual practice, but also the connection in mentorship or in groups or however we want to connect to other people who are on the same path on various points. It doesn't have to be like, but people who get you in those moments and who can remind you that there is another way to look at this painful process that you're in right now, and to have like someone who tells you, okay, well, look at it from that perspective, or see how everything played out in the past. So why don't you take a leap of faith and trust that it will in the future too? And I feel like often the more we go into spirituality, the more advanced we're there, we feel like we kind of do it alone. But still, it's so much easier if you have a circle of people who is guiding you through these moments, and who is there for you when you can't show up for yourself fully because you're so caught up in the drama. So that's always something that I wish I knew earlier, because I was always retrieving to myself and saying like, I can handle it alone. And yes, I can, but it can be so much easier if you have someone who is, supporting you and lending you a hand and saying like, well, it will work out.
Always, yeah. Always, and so I'm always a fan of having allies, having teachers, mentors, coaches. I mean, because sometimes I don't have that community around me. I have this idea, I have this vision, but I'm not surrounded by those people yet. And so I'm always the type of person that's always looking for community. That's how I ground myself in spirituality. If I have a group, if I know that other people are on the same path or the travelers on the journey, it just makes it feel less lonely.
Which I think can be just the motivation we need in these moments where we feel like it's not working or I'm giving up or it's too hard. And then you have someone else who might have been on that point or over that point already, or who is just there and say, I see you and I'm here. That is such an amazing feeling. And I feel like when you talked about that, I had this like women gathering in the woods picture
Yes.
in my mind. We said like, that's exactly where we come from. That's in our genes still. That's like the way we alchemize pain and we create insights as women together with nature, together with other souls. It's not a path that we need to go alone. We can, but it's not needed. I feel like it's something we're collectively coming to a point where we say like in partnership, but in any relationship, we can draw from each other's insights on the various spiritual paths and methods that are there and kind of like throw that all together and create something that is uplifting to whatever that person needs in the moment.
So beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, we see how that goes. It's a beautiful picture, but sometimes it's not as easy to find in like maybe in a city, or depending on how deep we are in our spiritual closet, it's sometimes an inner picture, and that I feel is so okay, because if you know that people out there are feeling the same or going through the same process, that can be very soothing as well.
It's like that Rumi quote, what you seek is seeking you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. Thank you so much. I feel that's just a perfect ending. Rumi always is a very good, bringing a very good energy. Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
a wonderful, soul nourishing conversation. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your energy and your time. And I'm really happy that we found a time to share.
Amazing. Me too. Thank you so much, Anna. It's just been such a pleasure connecting with you and chatting with you. I really felt like we were just gabbing over tea.